The House of Night series by PC and Kristen Cast, a mother and daughter writing team. There are 12 books in the series, and it covers a 1-year period for Zoey Redbird, our main character, and her friends, a number of other characters that she meets throughout this entire process. Basically, the House of Night is a school where humans who are transitioning into vampires have to attend classes. They need to be near adult vampires during the transition. They've learned a variety of subjects at the school, not just what it means to be a vampire and all that entails, but a number of other subjects as well, including history and a number of other things. So basically, it's like the Hogwarts for vampires. To me, the series is about change. We see a number of the characters, not just Zoey and her friends transitioning from human to vampires, but we also see a number of other characters looking at decisions they've made, choices they've made, including Zoey's mother. There's also Kelowna, who we meet later in the series. It's just a fascinating read to see how the adults as well as the teenagers handle different situations. It's also about belonging. Zoey's switching from a human school to a new school, making new friends, finding her way. She's also different than the others going through the change, so how she handles all of that. It's about friendship and sticking beside people when the going gets tough, even when you're not quite sure what that's going to mean. It talks about family heritage, in particular for Zoey with her grandmother, and legend and different stories that come up throughout this. It's also about spirituality, and what I find interesting is most of the things that these vampires do are very much based in earth religions in terms of the elements, the colors that they relate to, and the different meaning that they give to the various holidays and what they do to celebrate them. I found that fascinating because this is a series about vampires, whereas Harry Potter is supposedly about witches, and yet there is very little in that series that has to do with actual earth-based witch spirituality. It's more the Hollywood style of what witches would do. So for anyone interested in earth-based spiritual paths, ironically, the House of Night series is where you would actually learn quite a bit about that. The series begins just before Samhain, as some people say, or Samhain, as it is also pronounced. It's just before Zoey's 16th birthday, and that's when the transition starts for those who have this particular gene and switch from human to vampire. The change takes place over 4 years. It's a very slow transition, and unfortunately not all of the fledglings successfully complete that transition. Zoey has a younger brother and an older sister, but she's the only one who goes through the change. It's the one thing I did find a bit frustrating about the series is it doesn't actually explain, or I didn't find the explanation for why some people have this particular gene. As I already mentioned, basically it's the Hogwarts for vampires. Zoey is what they call marked at just before her 16th birthday, and the first part is a crescent on the forehead. Zoey is not like the other young fledglings, and her marks come in rather quickly. As I mentioned, first there is a crescent moon on the third eye. The other tattoos fill in with personal interests. So in Zoey's case, she has the different plants. That's what her tattoos become. Others who are interested in horses or different activities would have that type of tattoo fill in. Zoey's roommate, Stevie Ray, is someone who immediately accepts Zoey. They become friends. Unlike Zoey, Stevie Ray has a very supportive family. She has other friends in the school who she introduces Zoey to, welcomes her into the group. Personally, I really enjoyed the character of Stevie Ray. Zoey was okay, but there were just some of her choices that I really didn't find believable for the character, and not just because she's transitioning from human to vampire, but I found Stevie Ray a more interesting character in many ways because of her choices and how she supports her friends. We also meet a character named Aphrodite. She's much like Malfoy in Hogwarts. She's rich. She really doesn't like humans, as Malfoy didn't like muggles. With Aphrodite, we see some major changes through the series for a variety of different reasons, and her viewpoint changes somewhat. The other friends throughout the series are Damien, Aaron, and Shauna. They stand by Zoey, even though sometimes she doesn't treat them very well. Like I said, different choices. At the House of Night, there are cats. The vampires are very much cat people. That's part of the series that I enjoyed. And Nayla is Zoey's cat, such a little sweetheart. And in the House of Night, the cats adopt the humans. So I should say vampires, like our kids who adopted us. All four at the top here. We have Morgan on the beige cat tree. We have Cedric also on the beige cat tree. Xena peeking out of the cube when she was obviously much smaller, if you've seen some of my current videos. The two black boys there, the one sitting up is Shadow. The one in the cushion, on the cushion, is Panther, who you would also have met from the Friday videos. And below the boys is Tiki. Our only didn't come in the backyard and got taken into our home. We actually went and found her at PetSmart. But I very much enjoyed the part of the story where it's the cats who pick their owners. A main character as well is Zoey's grandmother. Zoey's home life wasn't what you would call great prior to the change. She lives with her mother, her two siblings, and her stepfather. Zoey and her stepfather definitely do not get along. He is high up in the religious community mentioned throughout the series. They don't approve of the vampires, and there's a lot of tension there. Zoey's grandmother, on the other hand, is very accepting. She's very supportive. She stands by Zoey through the transition, helps her get settled into the new school, whereas Zoe's mother really doesn't have much to do with Zoe after the change begins. The grandmother has a lavender farm. It's a lot of special memories for Zoe, and there's a tight bond between these two characters throughout the story. Zoe had a human boyfriend. They were a bit estranged at the time of the transition, and things get very bizarre afterwards. She ends up imprinting Heath, and things get really weird after that. Heath is a football player. He has some issues with substances, and the other football players also become part of this story, and there are a variety of twists and turns, not just because of the imprinting. As you can imagine, having a human hanging around a school of vampires makes for a bit of tension. Neferet is the teacher and mentor to Zoe. She realizes early on there is something different about her, and certainly as the tattoos begin filling in quite quickly. Neferet has been a vampire for quite some time, so she knows that these quick changes and the tattoos filling in are not typical. As our story progresses, however, Zoe begins to realize that Neferet is not the supportive individual that she originally thought she was, and the tension between them begins to grow and goes on up until our very last novel. The goddess Nyx is who the vampires acknowledge, recognize as the deity who watches over them, and also the guide for Zoe. Zoe hears Nyx. There are times when things become very difficult. There is heartbreak and trauma throughout the year, and Nyx is the one that they turn to for support and guidance. Other major characters throughout the series, we have Colonna, who was once the consort to Nyx. There was an issue between them, and he ended up leaving and going to what we'll call the dark side. Meanwhile, Nyx had continued to watch over him, but could not interfere with the choices and decisions that he made. Next to Aphrodite and his son Rephaim, who below I've represented with the crow, there's a lot of major growth for Colonna. He begins to realize the mistake that he made long ago, and that's a big part of what drives this story as well, is his interactions with Zoe, attempting to bring her over to the dark side, and various changes that occur. Some of the changes for Colonna happen because of his son Rephaim, who transitions between a bird and a human. Stevie Ray has a lot to do with the changes with Rephaim and his choices. He becomes very supportive of Stevie Ray and the vampires, trying to bring things more to the light rather than reverting to the darkness. That, of course, puts him in conflict with his father. But like I say, there are some major changes and events that happen throughout the story. The one thing I did find frustrating, and I'm not giving away any spoilers, is that although Colonna seems to be given a major pass near the end of the story, unfortunately Rephaim is left having to transition, which that I didn't think was very fair, considering everything he went through and suffered and the major changes that he made. But that's just my biased opinion. That is a very brief summary of the 12 books that make up the House of Night series. Let me know in the comments down below if you've read the series. What were your thoughts about it? I know there are definitely some people with strong opinions. As I was looking into the story, I found someone who had web pages and pages and pages of why they disliked it. So I'm curious to know if you've read it, what were your thoughts? I enjoyed it, even though, yes, sadly, there are some cats who do not make it to the end of the story, as some of the characters throughout the story as well. It's very heart-wrenching. One thing I didn't really buy into as well are some of these massive issues that happened. The story takes place over a year. Our main characters are teenagers. There is definitely PTSD because, like I say, some of these events are huge and very traumatic, and I would find it hard to believe, whether they're transitioning into vampires or not, that teenagers could quickly rebound from some of the events that occur. But again, that's just me. Like I say, one of my favorite characters in this series was Stevie Ray. She, for everything she ends up going through, never stops believing in her friends or supporting them. There's a lot of changes and twists and turns throughout the series. And that's pretty much a wrap on the House of Night. And until next time, keep an eye on your forehead. You never know when some of those changes might take place. Take good care.